Hi, the Mudbrooker here. The Virginia State Legislature recently passed a personhood law. Personhood laws state that from the moment of conception, a fertilized egg and all subsequent stages of gestation are by law considered people, with all the rights and privileges such status conveys. While they were at it, the legislature also passed a law stating that any woman seeking an abortion must, at her own expense, be object raped with a transvaginal ultrasound probe. I'm a humanist. That means I believe that the human race has tremendous potential. At the same time, I am also a deeply cynical man. If I've learned nothing else from life, I have learned that the vast majority of humanity is nothing more than a waste of good fucking skin. So anytime that somebody from the anti-abortion crowd says something like, well, how do you know that aborted baby wouldn't have grown up to become the person who cured cancer? It always starts sort of a thought experiment in my mind, where I consider both the potential and the more likely outcome of what that child's life could have been. For this little thought experiment, we'll assume that the far-right wing has gotten their wish and managed to implement the bulk of their social agenda. They're not all that far off, so it isn't really a stretch. We'll also assume that a young woman in an impoverished town has become pregnant with a daughter. This daughter does in fact have the potential to grow up and become the person who cures cancer. The first few years of a child's life are critical both for their physical and mental development. With proper health care and nutrition, a child can live up to their full potential. But since our hypothetical girl's mother is living in poverty, and since most of the childhood health care and nutrition programs have been deeply slashed, she's unlikely to receive proper treatment for many childhood maladies like a chronic ear infection that never quite goes away because they don't get proper care for it, and she's unlikely to receive the proper nutrition. You see, most of the cheapest foods that the poor people can afford here in the United States are highly processed. They're full of fat, sugar, and salt, and while they have tons and tons of empty calories, they don't have much actual nutritional value. So while a child fed a diet like this will more than likely become fat, they're still not getting proper nutrition, and it's unlikely that they will ever live up to the genetic potential that they were born with. A few years pass, and the child is now old enough to start school. Since her mother can't afford tuition to a good private school, she ends up in a public school. By now, the public schools would have been completely overrun by fundamentalist right-wing Christians who insist that their version of things be taught. Rather than being given a good education, taught critical thinking skills so that she can actually solve problems, our girl is educated by teachers who aren't paid enough to actually give a shit, who simply teach her to memorize rote facts so that she can parrot them back for the state-mandated tests that the schools must run in order to retain their funding. Science classes consist of being told that evolution is a left-wing conspiracy taught by people who hate God and hate America, and the only real explanation for our presence here is that God created us. History would consist of a carefully rewritten curriculum showing that America is the greatest Christian nation in the history of the world. A few more years pass, and our girl is becoming a young woman. Now is the time when she would be given some sex education. Rather than be given proper sex education, where she's taught what's happening to her body, what to expect next, taught about birth control, prevention of STDs, and how to decide whether or not she's actually ready for sex, she is taught that once a month she will undergo a filthy and disgusting process called menstruation. She's also taught that boys will want to have sex with her, but only a depraved little slut would actually allow them to do so. Shortly after this, our young woman would begin high school. Rather than taking advanced college placement courses and honors classes, she is herded along with the rest of the kids, being fed a curriculum dumbed down to the point where it's impossible for any of them to fail the standardized tests. And the summer before her senior year starts, Instead of having to decide whether or not to accept a full scholarship to Harvard or a full scholarship to Yale, our young woman actually believes her boyfriend when he tells her that since they drink 2 cans of Mountain Dew a day and it's her first time, it's impossible for her to get pregnant. In spite of her pregnancy, our young woman manages to graduate high school. But of course college isn't an option. She has a newborn baby. There's no child care available for her to go into school further or even get a job for that matter. And even if it was, her grades slipped because of the pregnancy and the problems attendant to that, to the point where she couldn't even get a scholarship. And since Pell Grants are a thing of the past, and the Department of Education has been abolished, the only way you can get a student loan is through your local bank, provided you can come up with 150% collateral against the amount borrowed. Since neither she nor her parents are in any position to do that, she's pretty well stuck in a life of menial jobs. A few more years pass, and about the time when our young woman should be graduating from college, she has managed to find somebody to take care of her child while she goes to work. And since the United States is now a corporate utopia with no minimum wage, she gets a job that pays $4 an hour. A few more years pass, and about the time she should be defending her doctoral thesis in which she claims to have discovered the mechanism by which the reproduction of cancer cells can be controlled, she has managed to work her way up to cashier down at the Walmart, and she's making $6 an hour. Yet more time passes, and just about the time when she should have been taking the podium in order to receive her Nobel Prize for Medicine, this woman has finally made it to shift leader. She's now making the big money down there at Walmart and bringing home $8.50 an hour. So, when anybody in the anti-abortion camp asks, how do you know that baby that was aborted wouldn't have grown up to cure cancer? The humanist in me has to wonder about the potential that may have indeed been lost. However, the cynic in me knows better, and can't help but ask, how many people who could have cured cancer were destroyed after they were born by the policies which you work so hard to implement?